Hey. Hello. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Good to see you, Steve.
Good to see you too. Can you bring
All
your
right.
volume up just a little bit?
Bring my volume here.
Oh, you sound great.
Oh, great. Yay. Hey, guys. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. I'm Dan Dinley, founder of GuitarZoom, and this is my friend Steve Stine. We're going to be doing, I don't know what part we're on at this point, but it's a lot of the music theory workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about the circle of fifths, which seems to be a thorn in a lot of people's sides. We're going to hopefully bring you a lot of clarity on what that is. Once you get it, it's like riding a bike. You never forget. Super excited to be doing that with you today. Please know how much we do appreciate you being here with us, and to take your time and to be with us is just, it's awesome. We're amazed that you would spend your time with us. So thank you for that. If you have any comments, please put them in the comment box. Any questions, let us know. Please remember to subscribe and to turn on notifications so you can be notified of the next session if you're interested in joining us again for this. Everything we're talking about during this music theory workshop series is related to Steve's masterclass. It's called Music Theory Masterclass, and it's available at guitarzoom.com. It's an absolutely fabulous course. It used to be 12 weeks, and you get instant access to the entire thing. It goes through the cage system. It goes through all the scales. It goes through how to build chords from scales. It goes through chord progressions. It goes through modes. It goes through everything you would need to know as a guitar player. That Music Theory for Life Masterclass will set you up. And everybody who's enrolled in that thing loves it. And it's a resource you can use forever. And if you've always wondered, like, how does this stuff work? I mean, I walked around as a guitar player for a decade before I finally understood what the heck I was doing. And it's just a really great point of clarity when you can speak with other musicians and understand what you're playing. Just makes things so much, just makes it make sense, it's good. It boosts your confidence too. So if you'd like to check that out, go to guitarzoom.com. Steve, what are you going to be teaching us today?
We're going to be talking about the circle of fifths. I got a bunch of people that were asking about it and why you would learn it, so I'm going to give you some just basic overview of the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths really just requires some elements of memorization, but we're going to talk about what you'd use it for. So.
Okay, cool. Let's get at it.
Okay, so this is the circle of fifths. And what you want to recognize here is that if we take a look at that, if we move clockwise from the C on top, you'll notice the C doesn't have any sharps or flats, right? And that's why we've been using this key is just to make things easier for us. But if we start there and we move to the next key over there, what you're going to notice is that it has one sharp. And then if you move to the next one, you're going to notice it has 2 sharps and 3 sharps and 4 sharps and 5 sharps. And then 6 sharps and, God forbid, 7 sharps. Okay? But that's what it would be. And then,
Right.
and then if you move clockwise, you're going to notice you're going to move from 0 sharps, 0 flats of C to 1 flat, and then to 2 flats, and 3 flats, and 4 flats, and so on. So it's a really easy way of referencing a key and then memorizing those keys. Now, on the outside of the circle, you're going to notice all of the notes are capitalized. And they're capitalized to tell you that those are major keys. So the key of C is major. It has no sharps, no flats. The key of G is major. It has 1 sharp. The key of D is major. It has 2 sharps, and so on. If we move the other direction, the key of F is also major, and it has 1 flat. The key of B flat is major. It has 2 flats. If you move inside the circle, you see there's small letters, and those represent the relative minor. So the key of C major has a relative minor key. And again, that's a whole nother conversation. What is relative minor? But if you remember, if you've been with us for a while, a long time ago, I talked about how, give me just a second here. I'm trying to find the right button to get back. There we go. When I was younger and I was learning how to play Iron Maiden and all that stuff, and I wasn't interested in major, and because major was irrelevant to me, you start learning that everything actually comes from major. So even minor scales, minor keys come from major, and that's what relative major and minor is. So the cool thing of this is that you can see in the center there, in the middle of the circle, the relative minors. So the key of C has the relative minor of A minor. The key of G has the relative minor of E minor. The key of D has the relative minor of B minor, and so on. And those relative minors have the same key signature. If C doesn't have any sharps or flats, neither does A minor. If the key of G doesn't, or has one sharp, so does the key of E minor, and so on. So that's really the first step of understanding what the benefit of the circle of fifths is it's an easy way of seeing the key signatures and the names of those key signatures and the relative major and minor keys. Mm-hmm. Now, if we go to the next little chart there.
Hey, before we bounce into this, let me make one comment on your other slide there.
Okay.
Guys, the whole reason this thing is called the circle of fifths, okay, is because if you start at the very top at 12 o'clock. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry. That's the next step. I jumped the gun.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So the circle of fifths, what happens in this slide, you can see that what you're actually doing each time you move from 0 sharps to 1 sharp to 2 sharps, or whatever the case may be, you're moving in a fifth, a perfect fifth. So C to G is a fifth, G to D is a fifth, D to A is a fifth, A to E is a fifth, and so on. Mm-hmm. If you move the other direction, if you move counterclockwise, sometimes this is referred to as the circle of fourths if you're moving that direction. So, for instance, C to F would be a fourth, and that's how you get 1 flat. F to B flat is a fourth, and that's how you get 2 flats. So Dan is absolutely right. So when you move across this thing, you're just moving in fifths if you move clockwise, and you're moving in fourths if you move counterclockwise. And again, it's just a reference. Don't let it be confusing to you. It's just a reference to see what a key is and what the next available. If we move from 1 key to 1 sharp to 2 sharps to 3 sharps and so on, we're actually moving in fifths. So this first little step shows you what the information is, and this is the most important thing. And of course, our next slide that Dan was referring to here is showing us as we move, okay, we're moving in fifths. Or if we move counterclockwise, we're moving in perfect fourths.
Yeah. So, Steve, I'm curious. I want to ask you a question. What significance does the circle of fifths play to you as in terms of being a guitar player? What? Okay, I'm curious about this answer because I have my own opinion about this, but I want to hear what you have to say first.
Well, I think for me, the circle of fifths, in whatever capacity you try and visualize it, it's the shortcut, right? I mean, that's for me what it was learning. I don't think of other than the third thing we're going to talk about, I don't really think about the circle of fifths as the circle of fifths because I've learned them so many different ways. So for instance, the C having a relative minor of A minor, that's a nice shortcut to know what the relative minor is. In my brain, the relative minor is the 6th chord in whatever major key I'm in. That's how I think of it in my head.
Okay.
But the circle of fifths shows you a shortcut. So if you don't know what the 6th chord is of each one of your major keys, this is a nice, easy reference for that. And the second thing is learning the order of 1 sharp, 2 sharps, 3 sharps, 4 sharps, that sort of thing, to kind of give you an easy reference. Again, I always think like the circle of fifths it's like a poster you'd put on your wall as a shortcut to figure out what these things are. So if somebody says, oh, the key of D, and you go, well, I'm not sure of the chords of the key of D, I'm not sure what the notes are in the key of D, the circle of fifths can give you that shortcut very easily. I would still strongly recommend at some point you memorize these things in your head so you would know that the key of D has 2 sharps. And you know what the chords, which again, we did a series on that, a lesson on that a while ago, but you'd know that your 1, 4, 5 are major, your 2, 3, 6 are minor, your 7th is diminished, all that kind of stuff. Like that's what's going on in my head, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, the point I really wanted to get, I wanted to make this really practical for everybody because, I mean, we're guitar players and theory is the language of music for all musicians. we just happen to think that all music is guitar because we're guitar players.
Right.
But the reality is there's a big old world out there of music. And so it's like, well, cool. How do I apply this to the guitar? Let's get really practical for a second, guys. When you're looking at that circle of fifths, for me personally, it's not that useful. I'm just going to be really honest with you, because for me, I don't have time if I'm playing with a group of musicians to be like, I'm like, okay, this is a 1-4-5 chord progression in the key of D. Okay, well, let me get my circle of fifths out and think about how many sharps and flats. Like, the reality as a musician, guys, is that just like the circle of fifths is kind of like you go to Spain and you've got your little translation book there, and you want to say like, how do I go to the where's the nearest bathroom, whatever. You got to look it up, or nowadays you're just talking to your app and it'll tell you. That's like the circle of fifths. It's like a tool, but what you really got to do is know how to ask the question, because you know how to phrase it in your mind. And really, that when you're playing in the real world, you got to have this stuff memorized. But the good news is,
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the good news is you don't have to memorize. There's certain keys that are more practical in the real world that you just need to know. Like D, it's going to have 2 sharps. What are they? F sharp and C sharp. And therefore, you know what notes of the D major scale are. And you know, if you understand your chord theory, which chords are going to be in that thing. You know, you ain't going to be using a diminished chord 99% of the time. You're never going to have a diminished chord. It's either going to be a major or minor. And you know what those chords are. Do you really need to know what C sharp major chords are? And not, like, probably not. You know what I mean? So what I would recommend is, why don't we just get real practical? Steve, you can tell us.
Well,
what are the keys they need to know?
Okay, so before I go into that, the 2 things I would say to what Dan just said is, if you're an aspiring jazz guitar player, your understanding of this is more pertinent than maybe the standard rock guitar player that's playing AC/DC, right? So I think it's viability and the keys that you play in. Like, if you've ever played in jazz band, you play in the key of B flat a lot, right? You play in the key of E flat a lot. If you're playing a lot of rock music, you don't play in those keys very often. So it kind of depends on what your goals are, on what the information, what's most pertinent to what you're going to be playing in. Because a lot of jazz isn't necessarily just in the key of A or just in the key of E. They'll be all over the place. So it depends on the individual. And the second thing I would say about that is, everybody starts not knowing anything. So what's nice about the circle of fifths is it's a nice jumping off point. I always think when I was a kid, I had that guitar chord poster. Mm-hmm. Because I used the guitar chord poster because I didn't know all my stuff.
Sure.
So I think they're beneficial when you're first trying to get into this thing. At the end of the day, I completely agree with Dan that in the real world, you've got to know this stuff. But until you get to the real world, you've got to find a shortcut that gets you to the place where you can memorize whatever it is you're looking for, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I think the circle of fifths is good for that. How do I use the circle of fifths? I don't even think of the circle of fifths because I know the stuff in my head, but that doesn't mean there wasn't a time in my life that that information wasn't something that I ran through. Mm-hmm. I think I looked at it a little bit differently, but it was still the same thing. Like, if I wanted to get to 5 sharps, I still had to count in my head to get to 5 sharps. What key am I talking about? So I suppose maybe I was thinking about the circle of fifths still, but I just wasn't seeing it as a circle per se. Now, in Dan's question of what are keys that I find most common, I, as a guitar player who does not play a lot of jazz, I play in the key of E, the key of A, the key of F sharp, the key of G, the key of D, the key of C sharp, minor. Some of those are major and minor. I don't play in the key of E flat very much. I don't play in the key of A flat very much. And if I do, I'm tuning my guitar down, so I'm not even thinking of it as E flat and A flat.
Right.
But that, to be honest, is my limitation as a guitar player in the parameters of the world that I live in.
Right.
So it's not that those aren't important. Certainly not. I've got a buddy out there who's a jazz teacher. His name's Jens Larson. If you've never seen him, you should totally check him out because he's an amazing guitar player, amazing guy. He would play in those keys all the time. So his perception of what is important and what isn't important is vastly different, which is why I love talking to him, because our worlds are so different. So in the popular guitar genre, whether it's pop music, rock music, blues music, things like that, yeah, I would say A, E, D, G, C, kind of those. Those are
Yeah.
kind of the keys that we play a lot in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I would say also, guys, when you're talking about just really getting practical, for me personally, I never really, I think Steve made a good point about it's a great reference point, like the analogy with the guitar chord chart. I had the same chart up, same scale chart, all that stuff in my room as well when I was first learning all this stuff. But actually, what really clicked for me later on was, instead of thinking about it in the circle of fifths, what I did is just memorize which keys had which. Was it sharp or flat? That was my first question. Okay, so if I'm saying E flat, it's obviously going to have flats and not sharps. If it's E, okay, cool. I would think, what's the key signature of E? It's definitely not a flat key, because there's only one key that has flats, and that's F, and that has one flat, but the rest of them are going to have flat in the name. So it's going to be E flat, B flat, A flat, D flat, whatever. And then I would think, okay, cool. If it's E, then it must have a sharp, because only the key of C doesn't have any sharps or flats. So if it's the key of E, then it's some kind of sharp. And how many does it have? So that was where I got locked down on, like, how many sharps does it have? D has 2, A has 3, E has 4, B has 5. And then I would ask myself, what order do those sharps appear? And I came up with that little shortcut that I was telling you before we went live here. The fat cats go dancing at Ernie's bar. That's the order of sharps that they appear on the staff.
So,
F.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Well, kind of. Let me do what you normally do to me and try and explain what you just said.
Okay.
So
I don't want to confuse people. I'm just trying to let them know how my brain works.
So what he's saying, the first thing that he was saying is, if you look at this chart and we move to the flats, which is to the left, right? The only key that has a flat that doesn't have a flat in the actual title is F. So if you memorize that F has one flat, okay, then these are the obvious ones: B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat. Obviously, those keys are going to have flats because they have flat in the name. So that's the first thing he said. Where if we move to the right, you see we have G and D and A and E. None of those have flat or sharp in their name. But what he said was every other key is going to have sharps except for F, because F doesn't have a flat in the name, okay, but it does have a flat. Okay, that was the first thing he said. Then the second thing he said about the fat cats go dancing, whatever he said.
At Ernie's bar.
At Ernie's bar. So when he first told me that, I was confused because I was looking at the circle of fifths going, I don't understand what you're saying. But what he's actually referring to is the key signature. So if you look at the key of G, the key of G has one sharp, which is F sharp. That's what he's talking about. If you go to the key of D, the key of D has two sharps, which is F sharp and C sharp. That's where he's getting his fat cats thing, right?
Yep.
If you go to the key of A, the key of A has three sharps, which is F sharp, C sharp, and
G sharp.
G sharp, right?
Yep.
So first of all, to kind of summarize what he was saying, you'll notice that every time you add a new sharp, you had F sharp, and then you have F sharp and C sharp, and then you have F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp, and it just keeps going, okay? Now, my question to you is, do you have a kind of slang to go the other direction? Like with flats, do you have some?
I do.
Okay.
So when I'm thinking about these things, I'm always just thinking, is it sharp or flat or nothing? And then the second thing I'm asking myself is, if it's flat, what flats does it have? And so they appear always in a certain order. So the shortcut that I learned years ago was bead, like the word bead, B-E-A-D, and then GCF, or greatest common factor. So it was bead, greatest common factor, was a little shortcut that I came up with to remember the order of flats.
Okay, so if that makes sense, then if you go to the F there, you can see on your screen, okay, that first one right there is a B flat. Yep. If you go to the key of B flat, now you've got B flat and E flat. You go to the key of E flat, then you got B flat, E flat, A flat. And again, just so you kind of understand, that's how you wind up memorizing these things, right? Because when you first start, you're just trying to get a semblance of what it is you're trying to do, what it is that you're trying to memorize.
Right.
So with Dan's information there, what that's doing is taking you even further on how you can memorize these things in your head. So, okay, so the last thing, just real quick to get this out. So the last thing here is just kind of explaining to you this idea, which is the idea of key changes or modulation. Like this is something, if you're a songwriter, this is kind of a cool idea, is that, for instance, if you look at the key of C, if you were in the key of C and you wanted to change keys, now again, in music you can do whatever the heck you want if you can make it sound good. The rules can be anything. But this is kind of a nice, easy way of getting started, is if you're in the key of C, the two relative, I shouldn't say relative, but the two closest keys, the key of G and the key of F there, are nice keys for you to modulate because there are some common chords between them. So if we were to look at the key of C and the key of G, for instance, just those two keys, okay? The key of C and the key of G share some different chords. For instance, they share a C major chord. They share a G major chord, okay? They share an E minor chord. They share an A minor chord, things like that. So it's kind of a nice thing to be able to do because those chords are kind of pivot points. So if you were to go to an E minor chord in the key of C, you might pivot on that E minor chord into the key of G. It's just something to think about. Now, again, there's lots of other places that you can go besides the two outside modulation keys of C. But that's a nice place for you to start learning how to do that.
So let me see if I understand what you said, Steve. Because I don't think I've thought about this, at least not in a very long time. Can you pull your chart up again?
Absolutely.
So what I'm seeing on this circle of fifths, okay, so this is the circle of fifths, guys, and at the top, of course, we got C, which has their sharps or flats. The green is the relative minor of C, and it's relative. I always think about the relative, like real relatives share DNA. Relative key signatures share a key signature. So the key of A minor has no sharps or flats. That's why it's below the C there. G major has one sharp and its relative minor is E. So, and then F, of course, its relative minor is D minor. And what I just thought about as I looked at this and was listening to you, what I'm thinking you're saying is that the chords, for example, of C major, they share some other chords with the keys that are most like the key of C. So G only has one sharp. C has no sharps or flats. So it makes sense that the chords that come from G, it would also have some of the same chords as C.
Right. Well, think of it this way. So the key of C, if we just looked at the 1-4-5, for instance, the key of C has C, F, and G. The key of G has G, C, and D. So they already share two out of the three major chords.
Got it.
They both also have A minor. They both also have E minor. You see, so there's a lot in common. If we look the other way, if we look at C and F, well, if we look at the 1-4-5 of the key of C, we have C, F, and G. If we look at the key of F, we have F, B flat, and C. So they share F and C.
Got it.
And they're sharing two major chords. And
Is
they're
that
also sharing D minor, and they're also sharing A minor.
Got it.
Which you can see underneath there, D minor and A minor, right?
Which is interesting. I've never really thought about this, but that's probably, you know how we always say rock and roll doesn't make sense? I mean, theoretically, a lot of it just doesn't make sense because you're like, what key is this? Well, but it makes sense in that you could have those different chords that share, key signatures or whatever, however you want to look at it.
Right.
That you would be pivoting in and out of those different scales. And if you were in a theory class, you'd be trying to pin it down on one thing, but it doesn't really work that way in rock and roll.
Well, that's the thing is you're absolutely right. Like in college, when you learn about all this stuff, there's a reason for everything. Even though I joke and say, well, and I'm not really joking, rock and roll has its own rules. It doesn't follow the traditional rules. But if you really wanted to sit down and try and, like you said, pin it and make it make sense, anything can make sense. I mean, it might be, for instance, there's a theory which we call secondary dominance. I don't know if we'll get to that or not, but secondary dominance is a great place to be able to borrow other chords from another key to use, even though you might be looking at it going, Well, that doesn't, if you just looked at it, you go, well, they don't fit in that key. Well, they're coming from somewhere else. And oftentimes, there's lots of places that they can come from if we want to try and define it. There's a lot of us out there in the world that just like the sound. You know, you might be playing and you like the sound of something that doesn't really make sense, and you go, well, that's cool. Well, aurally, right? You're listening to it and you go, wow, that sounds really cool. It doesn't have to go further than that. You don't have to define it unless you're getting a grade, right? You don't have to define where it's coming from. It can be just, wow, that sounded cool. I think I like that. You know.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this stuff, guys, is like, how deep do you want to go into this? How much do you really want to understand? Right. And because I think there's a level to this, it just totally depends on your interest and what you want to learn. There's a level to this that, you know, it depends on what you're, like you were saying in the other session that we did earlier, which is, who are you? Where do you want to play? How much do you want to learn? What's your current situation? You know, how much time do you want to spend learning this stuff? Are you just trying to get a good practical application? So when you see a chord chart that says C lowercase m 9, you know that's a C minor ninth chord, because that's available for you in this music theory masterclass, for example. Do you want to learn all the 7 modes that come from the major scale and how to apply those? That's available for you in this music theory masterclass. Do you want to learn the circle of fifths, the order of sharps, blah, blah, blah? Like you go through ninths, 11ths, 13ths, that whole thing, dominants, major, minor, sevenths, minor ninths, major, like the whole deal. You go through all of it. And I think the cool part about the masterclass is that, first of all, it's ridiculously priced considering the amount of education that you packed in that thing. Like, I think there was a 12-week class that now you just get instant access to. Pretty cool. And so you can jump around. Like, guys, if you're already like, oh, dude, I got the circle of fifths locked down, I just want to learn about modes. That's in there for you. You can jump straight to that module. If it's what chords come from the major scale, so you know exactly when someone says play a 6-4-5-1 chord progression in the key of A flat, do I know exactly what chords are? Yes, because you know exactly what the key signatures. You know that, you know. So the cool thing about it is you can just fill in the gaps for the parts that are most applicable to you right now in your guitar playing journey, so you can get some instant clarity on things you may have had questions for many years, and then have your confidence totally boosted when you're playing with other musicians, or just for your own understanding of like, oh, now I understand when I see.
That's right. I've always referred to it as practical theory. Like, practical theory is theory that you, like, if you've been joining us for all of these different sessions, there's some of them that you've watched and went, okay, that makes sense. I'm glad I watched that. And there's other ones you've probably watched and went, I don't even care. Like, what does that have to do with anything that I'm doing? Completely honest, because the truth is that everybody's looking for something different.
That's right.
And so the goal is to figure out what's practical for you that you can see yourself using. Like Dan just said, in my early days of playing, learning like the 1-4-5, 2-3-6 stuff was huge for me, because I played all kinds of songs by ear, but I knew them visually by the distance of the frets. Like Iron Maiden was 5-7-9, right? Dio was 5-7-9. Any of the 80s metal was 5-7-9. Everything was based on that whole step motion. But I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't understand what it meant or how it worked. I just understood how it sounded because I played by ear. So when I was able to start putting at least just a semblance of, oh, I'm playing a 4-5-6 in a major key is what I'm actually doing there, right? That's the kind of thing that really made a difference for me. And the reason Dan had mentioned I included the cage thing into the music theory masterclass thing, or the music theory masterclass, isn't so much because the cage system is a theoretical concept, but because as you're learning your triads and you're learning your intervals, to be able to visualize those things on the fretboard, for me, was extremely eye-opening. Because, and again, I'm not trying to go off on a tangent, cage to me wasn't like scale things, like people view cages like pentatonic cage systems. I didn't see it that way. Cage to me was chordal systems to move the same chord, G major across the entire fretboard, D major across the entire fretboard, C major across the entire fretboard, A minor across the entire fretboard. And it was revolutionary to me because I was never able to see that stuff. I just knew, my bar chords and maybe a couple of filler chords here and there. And so that's why I wound up adding that into the master classes, because it made sense with the information that I was learning. Because I was like, okay, so intervals, this is great. I mean, but what am I going to do with this? Well, if I could see that in a cage format across the fretboard, it just made way more sense to me. So
that totally makes sense. Yeah, awesome, man. So cool. Guys, thank you for being here. I think that's probably enough for today.
I think
You
so.
agree, Steve?
Yeah.
And as always, we thank you for your time. We thank you for being here. Carving time out of your day to be with us is just super cool. And we thank you very much. Please, if you're interested, guys, in making sure you get notified on the next session of these, go ahead and subscribe and turn your notifications on. And if you don't forget, we're going to post all of these, I'm still stuck on blues. We're going to post the entire guitar theory workshop on the YouTube channel as a playlist. So you can go there and just watch them from the first one we did all the way through this series. And we hope that you'll join us again for one of those. If you'd like to learn music theory, certainly subscribe and all that. If you want to learn it even faster, you can just go to guitarzoom.com and enroll in Steve's Guitar Theory Masterclass. Steve, thanks again, my friend, for being here and sharing your talents and your expertise.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Talk to you soon.
All right, brother. Later.